How many times have you heard that to get a truly heavy guitar tone, you've got to tune down? You know, drop C, drop A, double drop C, the lower the better, right? It's just kind of become accepted wisdom. But then you hear something like this. If you're not familiar, that's Heir Apparent by Opeth, and as you can tell, it sounds absolutely massive. It's heavy, it's percussive, and you can hear every note in those complex chords. You'd think that tone has to come from some ridiculously low tuning, but you would be wrong. Those guitars are in E standard. So how the hell do you get standard tuning to sound that good, that heavy? Well, that's what we're going to break down today. We're going to look over the shoulder of the absolute legend Jens Bogren as he mixes these exact Opeth guitars from a session he did for us on Nail the Mix. I've had the pleasure of working with Jens myself. He just mixed the last album from my band Doth. Every single thing he does as a producer or mixer is with very deliberate intent. Turning a knob from 4 to 4.1, moving a mic half a centimeter to the left on a speaker. Any of those tiny little details, that's the level of attention to detail he operates at. Today we're going to unpack his approach to mixing this Opeth song, dialing lower tone gains for maximum articulation, working with quadded rhythms, his specific EQ moves, and a multi-band expander trick that's completely different for standard tuning than it would be for low-tuned guitars. This is stuff that you can apply to your mixes tonight, no matter what tuning you're working with. But the biggest lesson here isn't some setting or a technique, it's a philosophy. It's about intentionality. So let's dive in and see how it's done.
My rhythm guitars, there were 4 of them. It's 4 unique performances here. If you have 4 guitars, the sum of the distortion wall will be bigger than the individual distortion amount.
That's actually a really, really important point. When quadding guitars, sometimes it's advisable to use lower overall gain on the individual guitars because the sum of the 4 put together will create a bigger wall of distortion than the amount of distortion that's on any one of the guitars. It's a great move for clarity and articulation. Do you find that in order to do a different guitar player on each side, they need to at least be within a relative tightness, I guess, ballpark?
I mean, it completely depends on the riff and the style. And if we do that approach, I should say that it's not like this is a dogma, that this is how we do it.
He just said this is not a dogma. So whatever he's telling you right here about how he tracks guitars, that's how it works for the project that he's working with at the time. And it's something that can work, but it's not dogma. At the end of the day, he makes decisions based on what's best for what he's working on at the time.
I would say that 80% of the productions that I do would be the same rhythm guitar player doing everything.
That's what I thought. 80% of his productions include the same guitar player doing everything, because usually there's going to be one guitar player that's tighter than the other, or they're just better sounding than the other guitar player, or they're better at certain types of riffs, and there's more of those types of riffs on the record. For whatever reason, it just tends to work out this way a lot and tends to yield better results. Every once in a while, you get a band like Opeth where every single member is just cream of the crop, and then you can do stuff that's artistically cool, like have a different guitar player on each side.
If this is an option, it's because of the differences that it makes it more interesting for me to listen to it. If it sounds wrong to me, then I would just use the same player for that section.
At the end of the day, he's going to do what's best for the recording, regardless of how they're doing things. He just said if it's not working out, he'll just, using the 2 different guitar players, he'll just pick one and do it. It doesn't matter. It's whatever yields the best result.
It's just that because we now have the possibility of making everything completely tight, then it suddenly has to be that way. It also doesn't make complete sense to me. I mean, listen to an old Metallica or Slayer album. It's some really great songs there. I don't think those songs would have been any better if it would have been edited into perfection in Pro Tools.
There's actually a such thing as guitars that are too tight. And the way that I discovered it is I was tracking a guitar player, a great guitar player. We were tracking rhythms left and right, and he was doing a phenomenal job. And we were listening back to a riff, and, you know, it was in stereo. and you're hearing the riff, and then suddenly it collapsed to mono, like there was only one down the center. But that made no sense because we definitely tracked both sides. They were not edited. I had not accidentally copy-pasted one side to the other side, and we checked. We checked the file names. Nope. No copy paste. Those were definitely performances. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. How come when we got just to that spot, it collapsed to mono? Then we copy pasted one of them to another part of the riff where the same notes happened, and the phenomenon did not persist right there. We were trying to figure it out. And then what I realized was this guitar player was so tight, he was so tight, and his two takes were so close to each other that they collapsed to mono. Like they were so identical that's what happened. It eliminated a stereo field. It no longer sounded like two different performances. It sounded and was basically the exact same thing. And that, my friends, is what I mean by too tight. If it's so tight that it's collapsing to mono, it's too tight. And that's how you can understand when people say when things are too tight, they get smaller. That's one of the things that they mean. However, there's a fine line. If things are too far apart in terms of precision, then it starts to get sloppy. So, there's a sweet spot, and it's up to you as the artist and producer to figure out what that sweet spot is for the material you're working on. Let's get back to the video.
And the secondary guitars are less distorted to add a little bit more clarity, and it's a Mesa rectifier. It sounds pretty farty, to be honest, if I listen to it, but it works pretty well together with Marshalls.
Jens, he's not just dialing a lower gain sound for all four of the guitars. He has the main guitars, which are 1 and 2, and then basically the support guitars, 3 and 4. And he has one sound for 1 and 2, and then basically a support sound for 3 and 4. So it's not just 4 of the same thing. It's the main sound and then something that fills in, I guess, the frequency gaps that he's looking for in the sum total of those guitars.
And Mesa is one of my favorite heads usually, because it just has this vibe that when you play it on its own, it seems like it's pretty hard to play. Doesn't really respond, perhaps the best, not compared to an Angle, for example. But in the mix, when you sort of have recorded 2 of them or 4 of them, you bring it up into the bass with the bass and the drums. The Mesas seem to win 50% of the time when you do shootouts. It's an amazing recording amp, in my opinion.
Just a word about how the Mesa wins the shootouts 80% of the time. I know that with plugins, people think that plugins limit choices and you're just using presets or you're not dialing things from scratch or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to point out that when people use real amps, they also tend to gravitate towards the same thing most of the time because it just works. That's just a human nature thing. Whatever tools you have, whatever tools you use, you're going to have favorites, and you're going to have those that solve most of your problems most of the time. There's nothing that solves all of your problems all of the times, but it's good to identify which ones of your tools are the most reliable 85% of the time, and then just have some other stuff around for that other 15%.
I know people who say that they don't EQ rhythm guitars at all because it needs to be right with the source or it won't work. I don't completely agree with that, but there is a point to that as well. If you have a bad rhythm sound, you're not going to be able to fully fix it.
Tattoo that on your forehead backwards so that when you see in the mirror, you can read it the right way. If you have a bad guitar tone, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to fix with EQ. You want to start with a good tone. Whether that's with an amp or a sim, doesn't matter.
The risk with this is that you don't listen to how it actually sounds. Because I recently had a client of mine saying that they lacked push in the low end. More or less by default, had I been compressing the guitars there, because you have technical aspects like the bass and the overall low end, and there was orchestra in there with timpanis and stuff, and you sort of think that you need to tame the low end. But when I listened to it, I could agree that it was lacking push. So on that project, I actually ended up doing expansion here instead. I like this FabFilter multiband EQ. And we put it in expansion mode, put up the range. So now it actually works in the other in the other direction. It's an anti-Andy Sneap trick, where you actually get more low end as soon as you have these palm muted things. It completely depends on the source and how much push you need from your palms and how much space there would be for that.
That's such an insightful move right there. Don't just do things by default. Like he said, it's very easy to just do moves you think you should do without actually listening to the program material, but you can end up with some results that just aren't what you would actually be going for. You need to actually listen to everything you're doing and make intentional choices. Like, for instance, he was saying that he was using the C4 on a set of guitars and on a timpani, and he was doing it because that's what he did. And it just wasn't getting the result that the client was looking for. And when he listened to it, he actually realized the client was right. And he ended up using a multiband expander on the guitars instead. That's actually the complete opposite of what he was just doing by default. So the lesson is, try to not do things by default and try to make intentional choices every single time you're mixing.
Right now, if I would solo listen more, I would lose my ear. The brain is your biggest enemy when you mix.
Notice how quickly he did that, because like he said, the longer you spend on it, the more likely it is that you're going to lose perspective on what you're hearing.
I'll leave it like this, just some extra top end for some richer harmonics. Mids is a good thing, around 1 to 1.5K is a pretty nice way of getting guitars louder without sounding too boxy or too piercing. But on the other hand, there's a lot of other stuff that needs to go into that range as well, like lead guitars, perhaps, and vocals, etc.
So there you have it. And as you saw, there's no single one Opeth guitar secret. It's a combination of dozens of tiny, deliberate decisions that all add up to create that massive, articulate wall of sound. It's about using lower gain to keep the transients punchy and clear, not just slamming the distortion and hoping for the best. It's about building a huge soundstage by quad tracking different performances from two monster players. And it's about knowing when or when not to use multiband comp and how much or how little EQ you need. But the main thing, the overarching theme, is intent. You saw how meticulous and detailed Jens was about every single part of the process. He's not just going through the motions or copying a preset. He's listening, he's analyzing, and he's making every single move with a specific purpose in mind. And that's the number one lesson you can take from this and apply to your own music tonight. Before you reach for that EQ, ask yourself why. What problem are you trying to solve? Before you crank the gain, think about the trade-offs. Do you want more sustain or more articulation? Approaching your productions with that level of intention is the quickest way to level up your sound. Now, if you want to go even deeper and get your hands on these exact Opeth multi-tracks to practice on, plus sessions from bands like Gojira, Lamb of God, and Lorna Shore, you have to check out Nail the Mix. It's the best way to see how records you love are actually made from the guys who made them. There's a link in the description below. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next video.